Ladies and gentlemen, fine people of the universe, we got a great show for you today. We're going to discuss a topic related to health that flies under the radar a lot of the time, but it deserves our attention because of how prevalent and subversive it is. And this topic, this phenomenon, is mind control and social control through music. After all, good health is determined largely by what we consume, right? And we most definitely consume the sounds and lyrics, accompanying visuals of pop music. One author has finally written a book that calls this out, reflects the absurdity of the music industry, primarily the hip-hop music industry. And he's written a book that acts as a alchemical transformation to remove the reader from what he accurately calls hip-hop hypnosis. So today I'm happy to bring on anthropologist and author of The Sharter, a comedic journey out of hip-hop hypnosis, Aldog FR. Welcome to the show.
What's up, man? How are you today? I'm going by Alfonso. I go Aldog, Alfonso. Some people call me Al Illuminati. It's just some variation of Al at all times. But a lot of people know my real name, which is Alan. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, Alan, Alfonso, your book was hilarious. I read The Sharter last week, and it just had me dying laughing. Like I had to pause a few times and just laugh, and like walk around and just laugh about what I had just read, and then dive back in.
That's awesome, man. I've had that happen to me a few times during a book where it's like I literally put it down and take a walk. And that the fact that you describe that effect is amazing because I've experienced that before. And that's what I want to give people is like that experience. The thing with a book is like you can give people such a fun experience, So
Totally. Because this is a heavy topic, And so I want to know like what first turned you on to the fact that music was being weaponized against its listeners to shape culture.
So I started diving down the conspiracy rabbit hole at a young age. We're talking like middle school. I started having some sort of instinctual questions, things that don't make sense. So I was down that sort of InfoWars territory, kind of like as an audience member for a long time since I was like 17, 18, 19. But I was huge hip hop fan. Like I looked up to Eminem, I looked up to 50 Cent, I looked up to later like Lil Wayne and Kanye. I was like, wow, these guys are so cool. And DMX, guys like that. So those were sort of my false idols growing up. And I'm like sort of in this space where it's like, okay, I'm diving into this conspiracy, but not my music. Not my music, man. These guys are cool, So as I start to sort of map out the geopolitical power structure and understand the methods of control are often entertainment, are often things that are right in front of us, often things that we voluntarily participate in, oftentimes enthusiastically. So that was sort of that's sort of a basic synopsis. For me, rap music was one of the last sacred cows that got slaughtered for me personally, because growing up, it was, I want to play football, I want to play basketball, or maybe I'll be a rapper, because these guys are cool. That's who I look up to. That once that sacred cow got slaughtered, I realized that this is ridiculous. Like this has been decades of absurdity. And when we think about the term hypnosis, it's behavior modification through repetition. So I think about on a macro level, the music, really for the last century, because a big turning point for me was that book by David McGowan, I believe his name is. Was it?
It's like Strange Scenes from Inside of the Canyon or something like that,
Yes.
about Laurel Canyon.
Yes, Laurel Canyon, Strange Scenes from Inside the Canyon. That was a pivotal moment for me because I started to realize there's almost always a connection between entertainment and military intelligence. And rap isn't any different. Like there's certain themes. Music is the most powerful magic in the realm. And I think it will always be used as a tool, but it's also a very, very positive tool. So I think that's why it's so important for social engineers to seize control of music because of how powerful it is.
100%, man. And I just want to make a quick correction. It's Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Laurel Canyon, Covert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream by Dave McGowan. And that book is super illuminating. It talks all about the sort of the 60s rock and roll scene of Laurel Canyon and how the three-letter agencies were infiltrating that scene and not necessarily creating the culture from scratch, but like directing it and nudging it along. And that's where we see a fusion of organic, original music being made, and then the industry sort of like taking that and working with the military industrial complex, for example, to generate some sort of social engineering. And you're totally right that entertainment as a whole is used to this end. On my YouTube channel, I put out a video and a podcast about The Sopranos, and how in the pilot episode of The Sopranos, there's so much coding around the big pharma, and it's basically one giant pharmaceutical commercial. And it came out in 1998, right before the opiate epidemic. You know what I mean? And it really ushered in this new wave of like pharmaceutical drugs, Prozac and all that type of thing. So, I notice it in movies and television, and in music, it's the same thing. So drugs is like a huge message, a huge theme in hip hop, especially, that gets pushed. And I think that is part of the cultural control, trying to get kids hooked on drugs. Like it sounds so dark and twisted because it is. And I also want to mention, like, dark demonic forces in music is nothing new. If we remember, the story of Robert Johnson, the blues guitarist, selling his soul to the devil at the crossroads, I think that happens more than people might think. And we see that so much in hip hop music. So let's talk about drugs for a minute. Like, how prevalent is drug programming in mainstream hip hop, and what should we be looking out for in that sense?
Wow, I think it's over the top at this point, but it does start out very subversively, almost innocently. You just made me think of Lil Peep. When you think of Lil Peep, it sounds like a children's candy, or it sounds like a children's cartoon character. Oh, hey, there's Lil
Right.
Peep, and there's this guy who eventually overdoses because he's so decadent, really, with his drug use. And it starts small. I always think about 2010, 2012 era with marijuana use specifically. It was Wiz Khalifa and Lil Wayne. And prior to them, it was Tupac in like 96, 97, who really normalized everyday sort of marijuana use. But later, with Wiz Khalifa and Lil Wayne, it became like this everyday habitual thing, like 24/7, I'm constantly smoking a blunt type of thing. And then with opiates, it does have this incremental sort of really subversive effect when you think about lean, in the fact that these rappers are drinking this codeine cough syrup mix with hydrocodone, promethazine, all these chemicals, but a lot of them are derivative of opiates. And is it being advertised to children when we see these rappers with this cup of purple, almost Kool-Aid looking liquid that seems friendly and fun? But in reality, it's an opiate, and it's being advertised on a massive scale. So yeah, the drugs thing, it's so incredible, man, because advertising is so advanced. Just entertainment, like something like Wolf of Wall Street, all the cocaine use, like, you don't think you're being advertised to. That's how advertising works. Like, it's
Right.
subversive like that.
Yeah, that's it. That's great. That's a great point. I think of shows like Mad Men too, where they normalize drinking during work, and it's interesting you mentioned the weed, and you even said around the 2012 era. It's so interesting you said that year, because that was the year that Washington and Colorado became the first states to legalize cannabis for recreational use in America. I don't know if that's a coincidence that we see huge hip hop artists coming out and puffing and normalizing it and showing how cool it is. You know what I mean? So, I don't think it's a coincidence that in 98, The Sopranos came out and pushed pharmaceutical drugs. And then 2012, there's a big push for weed, and right when it's becoming legalized. And
You made me think of something.
go ahead.
But with the pharmaceuticals, remember the artist called Little Xan? I mean, his name
Yeah.
is Little Xanax. Okay, it's like it's specific, and like, I got freaked out, and I really started to snap out of hip-hop hypnosis when these guys are naming specific pharmaceuticals like Percocet. Future, one of his big smash hit songs is Molly Percocet, Molly Percocet, reverberated to millions and millions of people on repeat. They're in a state of hypnosis where they think that's normal or acceptable behavior. And guess what? A few of them, to say the least, are going to get hooked because they're going to try it. It's been normalized. They'll try it a few times, try it 5 times. oh, I need it. Oh, whoops. I got to go to work tomorrow. I got to get some sleep. I need that. That's how it really starts on a massive scale. So,
And Xanax is one of the most deadly, disgusting drugs that I've seen friends fall victim to, and it was just extremely ugly. The withdrawals they were going through, how dependent they were, and you see that with a lot of pharmaceutical drugs. And the fact that it's just being pushed so heavily through music is highly, highly suspect. You also mix in like the heavy bass and the repetitive rhythms, and that helps sort of entrain the body and the mind and the heart. And I mean, if you turn up the bass loud enough in your car speakers, it's literally shaking your body, and you're being vibrated to the frequency of drug programming. And it's like, that's not an exaggeration.
dude, think about this. I always think about this. I had this experience. I was working. Okay. I'm in a garage and I'm painting a bunch of siding. Okay. I'm just painting and I'm listening to music, right? Stereo. There's a stereo over in the corner of the garage. Next to the stereo is a bottle of water I had. And so the music is playing and the bottle of water is vibrating right alongside the music. And I think to
Yep.
myself, if our bodies are 70% water and they're vibrating to the tune of this music on a massive scale, is when you realize the power of music. And it can be used positively, like something like church bells, a church choir, the birds, the natural rhythms of the birds. Somebody who can sing, the human voice to me is the most powerful human instrument, but somebody who's trained and disciplined in their instrument, that has a completely different vibe than something that's being socially engineered for all sorts of different nefarious purposes, really.
Yeah, the idea that the water vibrates right along with the music, it's creating the cymatic patterns and it's encoding that water. And then when you drink that water, you're actually consuming hip hop again because it was just encoded with those frequencies. And we can get into the conversation of like 432 and 440 hertz. I don't know if you ever went down that rabbit hole. It's kind of hard to parse out what the truth is there, but people do speculate that 432 hertz was the original tuning system. That's what Pythagoras used. It's what's based on sort of the cosmic clock. It's like a fraction of the day of 1 hertz. And people speculate that the Rockefellers increased that frequency to mismatch like our body's harmonics. But I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in that, and that's a little beyond our scope right now. So I just want to mention that's like an element of it, but I don't know if we need to
Yeah.
get too
I
deep
know the
into that.
generalities of that. I don't know the specifics, the engineering behind that, but just the generalities
Yeah.
make sense to me.
There's a lot of misunderstanding in it because a lot of it has to do with the vibrating medium and how big the receptacle is that it's holding this water or the sand that creates the somatic patterns. And we are frequency beings, but we're so complex that you can't just say like, oh, we vibrate at 432. That's way too general. So we'll leave that where that is. But let's talk about like the language, because the lyrics are another way to program our minds. And what I noticed, having grown up in the 90s, when hip hop was big and when punk rock was big, these two musics that were very anti-establishment and very like aggressive, we learned this inverted language where everything was sick, nasty, and disgusting. But those meant good. Remember
Mm-hmm.
how they programmed us to say, oh, that's sick. And it meant really positive things, or that's disgusting, or like any super negative word became the opposite. And so do you notice that too in hip hop? Are they normalizing words like sick and twisted so that we are then repeating those and programming ourselves negatively, but it's subconscious? You ever notice that?
I noticed something very similar, but like in a big way. I think in a lot of ways, rap music is like the all out destruction of language. But in some ways, you can be sort of poetic and creative with, bending words and things of that nature. But do you recall in like the 2008, 2011 era where it was all about for shizzle, my nizzle, whizzle, and all this
Yeah,
off like, or for sheezy and these things? Like, it
right.
starts off as slang, but then it becomes so pervasive that people end up talking like idiots. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and it's crazy. It's like I was listening to an interview of a basketball player, a guy named Tyler Hero. He plays for the Miami Heat, and he sounds like an idiot. And you can tell his speech patterns have been just dumbed down by the music and the degradation of language. So yeah, that's a big one, man.
Yeah.
Just the normalization of just like degrading each other, like singing songs about destroying this, destroying that, or this woman is that, this woman's, just the degradation of all humans, like on repeat. It's just it's degrading, just not in only in language, but well, specifically in language. Yeah, really, just a degradation.
It's very degrading. There's a lot of negative chanting and repetitive, like magical spells. If you look at this as magic, which it is and can be, these are spells that are being cast. And my question, because I always rejected rap music as a kid. I always said you can't spell crap without rap because I
Yeah.
liked punk and I liked singing and I liked fast punk rock music and I was just so turned off by mainstream hip hop. Eventually, I got into conscious hip hop, and I wonder like what is the role of that? Do you appreciate any of that? Like for example, I got into Jurassic 5, Black Alicious, Gangstar, people who just had a little more creativity, a little less of the gangsterism.
Uh-huh.
Where do you think conscious hip hop has a place, if at all?
In all honesty, I think it has a place to be listened to like once, because a lot of those songs are great poetic pieces of art, but they don't have that bass, they don't have that catchy chorus. So it's like, as somebody who was a huge hip hop fan, I will admit that sometimes I do go back into a nostalgic jam and I will sort of embrace garbage. I will embrace the trash that it is, and I will sort of enjoy it in that moment. And the issue with a lot of the conscious rappers is that it's hard to make a party jam. It's hard to make a conscious party jam, you know? And when people want to party, they want to party. They want to listen to something ignorant. They want to listen to Hate Being Sober by Chief Keef. And like, I get that. I still get that. Versus, it's kind of hard to have a club music. And this guy's talking about, political, socioeconomic issues, So it
Right.
has its own place.
Hmm. Yeah, you just made me think of like the rapper who talks about political socioeconomic stuff the most, in my opinion, is Immortal Technique. And he's
Yeah.
so aggressive and like it's gangster in this way where he's just calling out corruption on a massive scale. Do you ever listen to Immortal Technique?
I've heard all of it, and I get that, but it's like he's a great way to kill the vibe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's a vibe killer. If you're in the car with somebody, some friends or whoever, and you put on some Immortal Technique, it's just this is a bit much.
It is a bit
So
much, but I think the punk in me appreciates that because
mhm.
it's like the punk version of hip hop. But no, I totally get it. It even has this darkness to it. It sounds violent, and and the words that he's chanting are very strongly coded with like negative energy. Cool. So let's talk about your book,
Okay, got it right
The
here.
Sharter.
Boom,
Yeah.
beauty.
When was this released? And aren't you releasing soon a hardcover copy?
Yeah, so the hardcover is available now. It's available now. The paperbacks, I just got my paperbacks. The EPUB is available now. Hopefully, the audiobook will be available Thursday, the 14th, or what is it? Yeah, no, the Thursday would be the 15th, or Friday the 16th. I'm just waiting on Amazon. It's the 10 longest business days of my life, but that's done. But yeah, the hardcover paperback EPUB is available now, and this book was a process, man, because this book didn't start out as a comedy crime classic. This book, I was going down the David McGowan direction. I was going down all these different conspiracies within hip hop because I was still a fan, but I was still becoming sort of aware of the social engineering aspect, and also the spiritual realm in which music travels to and back to our realm. So there's a lot there.
Yeah, and if you just approach this problem in society as an anthropologist and you publish like articles or nonfiction books explaining what's going on, that only reaches a certain audience. And not everyone likes to read that stuff. But when you package it in a funny story that makes you laugh, it actually becomes an alchemical process. The laughter and the levity kind of makes you laugh at the whole situation. And like laughter is such a good way to process things. I find laughter is so similar to crying because it's this heart heaving. It's like this, ha, 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 ha. It's like this rhythm that squeezes your heart and kind of lets you process these emotions. So I like the fact that it's a fiction, but it's so based in reality. Like if you read it and you know anything about hip hop, Lil Wayne, and that whole culture, and the podcasts that are involved, like you will get all the references. Because I'm peripherally into the hip hop scene. You know, I know a little bit about it, but I caught pretty much all the references, and they're all just super funny. And it's can you talk to me a little bit about the alchemy involved
Yes.
in laughing about the situation and what will happen if you read your book?
Okay, so the alchemy, right? Well, you mentioned rap is crap. The book is literally soil. It's the Sharter, a comedic journey out of hip-hop hypnosis. It's soil, and I'm spreading this soil everywhere so we can grow something entirely new. I think we're at the end of a cycle, and I think it's sort of time to embrace that. And instead of, pulling up the documents, I got this research report, I got that research report. I think a more effective approach is to look back and satirize these things, just exaggerate. My biggest challenge writing the book was satirizing it because hip hop at this point is almost beyond satire. You got guys like Little Baby, Da Baby, and Pooh Shiesty. You got a female. It's like, dude, how do you satirize that? You know what I mean? You got a female rapper named Meg the Stallion. Stallion, it means male breeding horse. Okay, she's calling herself a stallion. And then you got another female rapper called Glorilla. She's calling herself a gorilla. It's like, how do I exaggerate this and make it hyperbolic? But that was my biggest challenge. But yeah, I think that the alchemical process is when you look back and laugh and you're more able to move forward, just like crying. Like once you cried, like it's over, you got that out. The laugh, it's like this involuntary reaction that it can't really be faked, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that to me is the most effective, instead of looking back like, oh my God, I can't believe we did that. This is so ridiculous. It's more effective just to laugh and just move on with your life and spread the soil, to grow.
Yeah, the concept of soil is interesting because the most fertile compost is shit. It's
Mm-hmm.
waste that people don't think has any use. That's disgusting. But when you spread, cow manure, worm castings, even human manure, if they provided they have a healthier diet, um, that is some of the most potent fertilizer out there that plants love. And new life and new growth grows out of that so much. I've noticed this in my life. I'm a Scorpio. I have a 5 times Scorpio, so I have a lot of that energy, and that sign is known for its transformative process. Actually, today we have a Scorpio full moon, and there's a lot of transformation going on. And just Scorpio being in the fall, the middle month of fall, which is like, when you think of the word fall, it has a downward angle to it, going into the ground, underground, into the darkness, bringing in the winter season, which is dark. And so I noticed that, and I embrace that. A lot of negative, quote unquote, things like waste are actually amazingly potent fertilizers. So that's cool that you call this soil, and that the whole book involves these puns, not necessarily puns, but like references to shit and satire, calling everything crap in a way.
Yeah.
Uh, but the way, even the way like the names are, instead of the Carter, it's the Sharter, and instead of Lil Wayne is Lil Stain, and even the famous hip hop podcast, No Jumper. You put a podcast in your book. Is it no dumper or dumpster?
No dumpster. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I want to read what you wrote about the No Dumpster podcast,
Okay.
because this is a huge part of bringing the hip hop culture to the masses, and another way for us to consume it without listening to the music and getting a lot of like behind the scenes. So, in the Sharter, you wrote, basically, Anton 44 ran a clout factory. The concept was simple. Underground artists appeared on his show and bared their souls in a long-form interview format, which Anton would then package and monetize. In return for their participation, the young artists would receive clout tokens. His studio seemed to work as a hub for trading shills on the clout exchange. I thought that was hilarious because it's very accurate. He does get these artists to bare their souls and talk about all this personal stuff, and it's just totally monetized. And usually with podcasts, like nobody gets paid. Like the guests don't get paid. It's all the host's revenue. So talk to me about the role of that podcast in particular, in society, and its role in just getting us to consume more of these ideas and energy.
Yeah, that's something I've been paying attention to for a while, and I've met Adam a few times. I met Adam in 2016. I met him at he was filming a vlog at a skate park, and I had a blog at the time, so I went there to promote my blog. I said what's up, blah blah blah. I'm working on this, that, and the other. And another time I met him at a mall, and that's a wild story because I introduced him to somebody, and then we got a picture, and it was. But Adam is ultimately kind of a husk, right? He's sort of this caricature of hip-hop hypnosis. He's covered in Mickey Mouse tattoos. He's interviewing 15-year-olds. He's pushing 40. He's involved in the sex industry as well. So it's like he specifically sort of hosts these rappers, and they essentially just get exploited. But with the interesting shift that's happened recently, and a lot of these rappers get their big interview and then they're dead. They end up dead or they end up in jail because they're on this sort of dark path, and he sort of exploits that. And then that's kind of their use. But what's been interesting lately is a lot of people have lost interest in the rappers because they're a pretty painful interview. Like these guys are painful to listen to, right? They're on drugs. Mm-hmm. They can barely talk. They're being exploited. It's just like kind of sad. So recently he's had a shift where he just exploits gang members. He exploits gang members involved with street violence and all this different criminality. And what happens is they end up getting in trouble, and then, oh, wow, that's more content for us to talk about. And these guys, they might rap. They're mainly criminals, but they might have a rap name. They might have one or two videos out. So now there's this kind of excuse to, okay, I'll interview this guy because he's an up and coming rapper. But in reality, it's just hood exploitation for the most part. But the thing about Adam is it's public that his father was bailed out by Bill Clinton specifically for mail fraud. So his father was loosely involved with New Hampshire politics. We don't really know too much. I don't know the specifics, but he ended up getting convicted of mail fraud. Bill Clinton personally pardoned him. Okay. And then also on the other side, Adam also has an uncle who was in charge of like the Export-Import Bank of the United States. And there's a connection with the Bush administration there. So he's not somebody who comes out of nowhere. He's somebody that's very, 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 very connected. And it's like, oh, I just happen to have this BMX studio. I just happen to start a podcast. But I think he's had help along the way. I do think he works hard at what he does, but he is sort of this caricature of hip-hop hypnosis because it's like, dude, you've got a Lisa Simpson tattoo right here. It's just obnoxious, right?
That's funny. And yeah, it is true that a lot of people in the industry are connected through their parents. I have a whole list of artists, the musicians specifically, who have like high level parents in the military industry. Dave Grohl's dad was a speechwriter for Reagan. Stuart Copeland had a father who was in the military, high level. And his band, by the way, was called The Police, which is a militaristic name.
Yeah.
Jim Morrison, his dad was a naval admiral who witnessed Pearl Harbor, and he was in charge during the Gulf of Tonkin. Like that was like his whole mission. Even Jack Black, who I don't know how subversive he is, but both his parents were aerospace engineers. Same with Frank Zappa. You have his dad was like a biochemical researcher or something like that. And so when we talk about Frank Zappa, Stuart Copeland, Jim Morrison, they were all big in the 60s in the rock scene. This goes back to McGowan's work about the three-letter agencies infiltrating the rock scene. And basically, I want to know, like, what are the tactics used by these social controllers to infiltrate the artists? We see, podcast hosts potentially as one. Their parents, the artist's parents potentially being another. The A&R person could become a handler, right? Even co-songwriters and producers, I think, have a hidden hand in some of these processes.
Yeah.
And also agents. So the people around these rappers, I'm trying to think of the exact question I want to ask you, but I think you know where I'm going with this, is like, what types of people in the industry, how do they get involved? How do they get their hands in the pot?
So the most prevalent relationship I've seen in regards to a handler, and you see this with a lot of guys, and this really ties in with drugs. In one of my favorite books ever, it was such a transformative book for me personally. It's called Drugs as Weapons Against Us by John L. Potash. And in it, he describes how some of our favorite artists like Bob Marley, Jimi Hendrix, Kurt Cobain, and others, right? Artists everybody knows are often being handled by their managers. Oftentimes
Mm-hmm.
they write their best stuff sober. Oftentimes it's their managers who will introduce them to an addiction as a means to control them. With Eminem, he's always been with this guy, Paul Rosenberg, with somebody, you mentioned the military connections. Chance the Rapper, his father was in the Obama administration. So
Mm.
oftentimes these guys are literally seen as idols, seen as heroes, but there's financial incentive oftentimes, whether it's their A&R, whether it's their record label, for them to actually pass away. Because the sad part about it is, let's say there's a manager, let's say there's, in Kanye West's case, it was like a trainer for a little bit, right?
Yeah, his nutrition. Yeah, I just want to interject because
Yeah.
that's Harvey Pasternak. He was like a nutritionist, exercise coach, who I think got Kanye totally hooked on bipolar drugs. If you look at Harvey's past, he was
Yeah.
researching these drugs for the Canadian government.
Yes.
Now Kanye's brain is fried and he's bipolar, and it's like we wonder why. You know?
Yeah. You mentioned the Canadian government. Drake, he says it on an intro to the Games album. He says like, "Oh, hey man," he's like calling him as part of an intro. He's like, "Oh, hey man, I was just busy. I was working with the Canadian Department of Defense." Or I think they call it the. He just says it. And anybody can look this up, and it's all public. And he just says, I think they call it the Canadian Ministry of Defense, but he just says it. "Oh yeah, sorry man, I was busy. By the way, I'm going to work on your album. Can't wait. Blah blah blah." Like trying to like pretend he's all cool, but he's just telling people. But yeah. Oh, I was going to say, so when these artists are hooked, they're this false idol that millions and millions of people are worshiping. Then the record label, the manager, whoever the case is, whoever it may be, realizes that when this artist passes away, their sales skyrocket. Like that's your biggest sale. Like that's your biggest day of sales is when you're no longer there because the product becomes finite. The product is no
Mm.
longer being produced. So it skyrockets in value. We see this. The biggest examples would be like Prince and Michael Jackson. But other artists, when they pass away, that's when they have their biggest day. I didn't know who Lil Peep was until he passed away. I didn't really know who XXX Tentacion was until he passed away. So there's all sorts of different dynamics and so much incentive. I always ask myself who benefits from this artist being controlled.
Totally. That's very wise that you mentioned, like, or pointed out that it's through drugs usually that these people become hooked, and then they become way more susceptible to influence. And it can be anybody around them. It could be their A&R person, their manager, their nutritionist, and actually in your book, it's the lawyer, the entertainment lawyer who gets them deeper into this like satanic part of the industry. So it could be a lawyer too. Talk to me a little bit about, it was Larry the lawyer, right?
Yeah, Larry the Lawyer. Yeah.
Do we see real life connections to, some connected lawyers of these artists? Because I don't know
Yeah.
too much about that.
So one of the most poignant examples that I can think of is a guy named Manny Aurora. And Manny, he represented Little Dirk in King Von when they shot at some people. And they were both on trial. Anybody can Google this. Anybody can YouTube this. But Manny Aurora also represented Young Thug. Oh, he represented the guy, Jimmy Winfrey, who shot at Lil Wayne's tour bus in 2016. So it's kind of like he's like this hip hop Atlanta lawyer who kind of always represents these guys, whether it's for financial gain or maybe he wants notoriety. But that's the first thing that came to my mind as far as, lawyers specifically. But in
Hmm.
terms of like, big head honchos, the guy who comes to mind is Lear Cohen. Like he's kind of the architect of the hip hop industry in a lot of ways. Like he signed a lot of acts and he still, does interviews on something like The Breakfast Club, where he'll talk about, some artists who are going through troubles and their addictions. And like, if you just look at like Lil Wayne, like if he didn't have drugs, he would freak the fuck out. Like a lot of these guys, um, just voluntarily, I wouldn't say voluntarily, but they kind of just addict themselves to the point where it's like, you're a mess, buddy. If you don't get what you need, you're going to be a mess. So somebody's going to handle you.
Yeah, and in Lil Wayne's case, we have Birdman, the
Mm-hmm.
Cash Money Records guy from New Orleans who, I mean, what did he sexually abuse Lil Wayne? Is that common knowledge?
He's a weird guy. You never really know, like with these guys like Diddy or Turdman Birdman, but it's just like it's that's why I think millions and millions of people are snapping out of hip hop hypnosis, because it's like, this was ever considered cool. Like
Hmm.
one of the first CDs I ever got was Puff Daddy and the Family. And I had no idea about the compromising parties he was hosting and what was going on there, and his sort of espionage style leverage blackmail techniques. I had no clue. It's like 8 years old. You know what I mean? But that's a great example of how, when you're looking at these false idols, they're seen as cool. You don't know what's really going on in their closets, and it could be absolutely disgusting. Um,
Hmm. So you mentioned espionage, and
mhm.
that's a big thing too. This is another way that the military industrial complex can infiltrate an artist. Basically, if they have something compromising on an artist, they can get that artist to work for them by reducing their sentence or alleviating the charges or somehow. And all they have to do is say, gather information on this person. Gather information. Go to a Diddy party and see what you can find, or like whatever information they want. They can use artists to act as spies. And this sounds like it could sound made up to some people, but if you just look it up, it's common knowledge now at this point. Julia Child, who not a musician, she was like a cooking show chef on TV, one of the first famous TV chefs. She was a spy,
Uh-huh.
you know, um, and it can be so subversive that no one knows. Like now, it came out. We know Julia Child worked for the government, spying on people. Any actor, any musician, any artist can do that. So what I'm hearing, my question was like, what are the tactics and who are the people used to infiltrate these true artists? And it sounds like it could literally be anybody around you. It could be the A&R, the co-songwriter, the agent, the manager, nutritionist. It could be a lawyer, who's working with the deep state or whatever you want to call it, who then gets you to become a spy. There's so many ways, and that's why it's so subversive, is because it's coming at you from like all angles and coming at these artists from all angles. And just to keep on the lawyer thing for 1 second, it's so funny to me that most artists, their goal in life or their big dream is to get a record contract. And what is a record contract? It's a legal document. It's a binding legal document that makes money for other people, which is so interesting. And a lot of times the artists don't read the contract because it's full of legalese. It's really hard to understand. It's usually they make it long, potentially partly to keep it confusing. And I don't know. I think I'm just reflecting on how the legal part of this is like huge, because that's what all the rappers want. If they get handed, hey, we're going to sign you, boom, they don't even read it. They're just, a lot of them probably just sign their name anyways, and then they realize down the road that they don't own their music anymore. And this is another way to exploit the artist, is to just own their music, own their publishing. Maybe they keep their songwriting portion of it, but there's another half of the revenue, which is the publishing and the copyright, which usually the record labels own. So the record labels even exploit their own artists. And I think you depicted that really well in the book with Turdman and Cash Money. And then the fight for the other, what was the other label?
600, Trash Money and 600.
Right, right. So there's these like competing record labels, and then it kind of eventually comes out where it's like they don't even want their artists alive because, like you said, they make more money when they die. And it's such a mess. And like the
Yeah.
legal stuff and that industry, the contracts are very binding. And I think that's a huge part of it that we just don't see because
Yeah.
we're too busy consuming this stuff.
Yeah, totally, man. It's interesting because when you look at the characters, whether it be Turd Man, Larry the lawyer, Carl, Anton, what unites them really is the spirit of evil. And even Chet gets consumed by the spirit of evil, this up and coming rapper. So that's kind of the common theme. And the spirit of evil shows itself: predatory contracts, exploitive podcasts, this, that, and the other. Somebody handling somebody and keeping them addicted like they're a prostitute on drugs, right? It's no different. So when you mention espionage, something I always think about is, what's the oldest profession? It's prostitution. What's the second oldest? It's espionage. So these things are going to be common. They're eternal. Like there's no escaping these things. They're always going to exist in some form. The theater, just the act of performance art, will always, will always exist in some form. But what's interesting, you talk about sort of contracts, and the publishing industry works the same way. Like if you want to write a book, it's like basically the same thing as the music industry. So what happens is an artist will be struggling, trying to make it, creating, they might have a full-time job. They're waking up early. They're working on weekends to do this creative project. So is the second any sort of bag of money gets dangled in front of their face with a contract, the impulse is, oh my God, they're so thankful. They're so happy. They feel as if they've made it. But in reality, it's a hook. So publishing, I went independent because it's way better for me as an artist. So I actually identify with some of these artists and their struggles in regards to that, because it's not easy to be an artist, right? But eventually you want to just go direct to your audience. And I think that we have the tools, whether it's in music or whether it's in publishing today, we have the tools to go direct, which is a very cool time period to be in. Whether you're making music, you're making podcasts, you got a Substack, you got a YouTube channel, you can go direct to your audience. And I think the tools are in place for that. So that's a very positive thing moving forward.
I totally agree. I encourage any artist listening to this, if you're a musician, to try to just put your music out there and control all of your publishing and all of your songwriting. Control and own your rights to your music. It is your intellectual property after all. And the industry is set up where you can get on TikTok. If your stuff's good, people are going to share it. People are going to like it. You get on one of these social media apps, get people to hear your music, and you can totally be a self-published musician. I mean, the industry is just not the same anymore. Back in the 90s and the early 2000s, the A&R teams had these huge budgets, and they would develop these artists and spend millions of dollars on these music videos, and lavish tours and things like that. We just don't see that anymore because the industry kind of fell apart with streaming, with digital music and being able to pirate music and stuff. So we are now a couple decades after that and seeing how easy it is to just do things yourself. So my book too is self-published. Become your own publishing company, become your own record label. And so do you have anything to say on that? Because I have another question about getting deeper into the dark part of the industry.
Well, the only question I was thinking about is you specifically, because I don't know about your sort of musical background. I know you're like into the New Orleans scene a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I lived in New Orleans for 5 or 6 years and played a lot of music. That city is very based on live performances. So a lot of the musicians in New Orleans don't know anything about publishing music. And it's unfortunate because a lot of those artists get exploited by the labels. And the musicians in New Orleans are so focused on playing live because they're playing multiple performances a day, over 300 gigs per year, well over, because that's just what New Orleans is about. We get so many tourists coming in, hearing live music, and it's a tipping culture. So I had to learn the hard way about copyright and music publishing. Cities like Nashville, New York, and LA, they're way more focused on the business part of it. And they can make a lot of money through recorded music. So yeah, most of my music career has been focused on live performances, but I have a lot of published music out there that do make me a few pennies every month on Spotify and or Apple Music, however you listen to music. And
so you can play everything though, right? You play a few instruments?
Yeah. I've saxophone's my main instrument, but I love playing bass and guitar.
Wow.
And drums. I have a couple albums where I play drums in punk bands. And I love singing. So I'm actually going to work on a new album pretty soon. I have like 20 new songs. So
That's
I'll try
awesome,
not
man.
to code it with too much. Thank you. I'll try not to code it with too much subversive stuff. Now, one thing we see in your book and in the music industry, because all you're doing is reflecting reality, is this theme that to be famous and to make it, it requires hard work and what? Sacrifice. And this is where we see a lot of the demonic stuff come in. I found it so funny that Chet, the character in your book, who's the up and coming rapper, he gets wind of the fact that these hip hop artists or people close to them are dying, and that there's this sort of demonic sacrifice needed. But without anybody prompting him, I don't want to give too much away, but without anybody prompting him, he takes it upon himself to try to commit a sacrifice because he's so in love with this hip hop game, and he thinks that's just part of the game. It also happened to be his friend who he tries to sacrifice, and I'm not going to give away any more because you all should go read this book. But how weird is it that we see so many people close to these rappers die right before they get really big?
Yeah, I think that is bizarre, but I do think my interpretation of it now in regards to sacrifice in the music industry in rap is that a lot of the times it can be just fractal. A lot of the times it just does sort of reflect somebody pursuing their dreams and sort of completely neglecting their family. And then oftentimes that relationship might suffer and to the point where that family member is no longer there. But it gets a little bit weird when you talk about sort of public deaths. The first one that comes to mind is Proof, who is Eminem's best friend. In the music video for Like Toy Soldiers, Eminem's best friend Proof is shot and killed and dies in that music video. And then it happens. Another one that comes to mind is Lil Wayne's music video for Lollipop. In that music video is an artist by the name of Static Fader. They shoot the music video, Static Fader is in it, but when the music video comes out, at the end of the music video, it says RIP Static Fader, who tragically died after this was recorded. There's all sorts of instances where, somebody like XXX Tentacion, his best friend, what's his name? Ski Mask, the pump god, said publicly, "Hey, this guy tried to sacrifice me." Like you know what I mean? Like, and everybody was like, What? You're crazy. This is nuts." And then what ended up happening? XXXTentacion, he ends up actually being the one who passes away. I feel like the magic sort of reversed on him, but I think it's really about this energy of self-centeredness, and we see things like that. These tragic deaths occur as a result of that energy, as a result of I will do whatever it takes, literally. And I think the devil says, okay, great. So I don't think it's this sort of highly ritualized thing. I think there are certain aspects of it are ritualized. Like, I think of it like this, man. If you were to visualize like an Aztec pyramid and there's a sacrifice taking place, and all that energy, all those eyes and ears are on that sacrifice of that, beheading or whatever the case may be. In modern times, everybody's looking at their phone or they're looking at screens. So if they see something like King Von being shot and killed and everybody sees the video, that's kind of a live action, millions and millions of people sacrifice ritual. I don't think it was planned. I think it just kind of happened, but it kind of looks as if it is a sacrifice ritual because it happened and everybody saw it.
That's a lot of loosh to harvest too. All those emotions of people watching this spectacle that's centered around death. That's a lot of energy to that these dark demonic forces could be harvesting. Now it gets a little intense when you look at it as like a 1-to-1 Molochian, spill the blood of an innocent, and then the dark forces will reward you. But I'm keeping that open as a very real possibility of how a lot of this stuff works. But I like how you also said it could just be a product of neglect and product of self-centeredness. That all makes sense. And we're not here to figure it all out, but we can notice things, and these patterns are they're there. You know what I mean? Now I find it interesting too that it's not just fans of hip hop that can be victim to hypnosis through music. One of the characters' dads was like a rock and roll boomer, and I think that rock and roll was to the boomer generation as hip hop is to the millennials. today, that rock and roll promoted all this degeneracy, drugs, drinking, and then his name's Roger, the dad in the book. He just becomes obsessed with keeping the party going the whole time. And so he sort of fell victim to this hypnosis through music and this drug programming. Honestly, I fell for it too. All I wanted to do as a teenager was play punk rock and drink and smoke weed and go on the Warped Tour. But I didn't realize how much they were coding us with degeneracy. I wanted face tattoos and look covered in tattoos everywhere. And I wanted to just do drugs and play music. So I think we all fell victim to this. It's not just hip hop. So I appreciate that you included the boomers and the rock and roll in this too, because it's not just this hip hop generation, right? How prevalent is musical mind control in general to you?
Well, something I always think about with the boomers is when you think about the bands like the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, and I just think to myself, it's been a half century of this music. It's been almost well over a half century at this point. Okay? It's been 50 years. So a huge moment for me was I was working with this baby boomer and he's singing this Rolling Stone song just word for word, lyric for lyric. I realize I know all the lyrics too. I know all of the words to this song. And I'm like, oh my God, if my generation is like this when it comes to rap 50 years later, a half century later, that's a catastrophe for the most part in regards to programming and of this, that, and the third, of degeneracy and what have you. But yeah, the thing is, it's not just rap. Country music. You will not hear a mainstream country song that doesn't include beer, whiskey, beer,
Mm-hmm.
heartbreak. And it's just like, that is, I've seen people become huge country fans and then they become alcoholics. And it's like, I can't ignore the correlation here. We would always listen to country at work and it was just every song, just alcohol abuse. So there's sort of different programming for different demographics, I feel. And yeah, it's not just hip hop. The country's just as bad. A lot of the pop music, especially for young girls, is absurd. And does it sound good? The answer is yes. A lot of the pop songs are engineered to sound incredible. So I often say yeah, I'm a sucker for pop. I'm a sucker for a good vocalist. I'm a sucker for a good beat because I acknowledge that it does sound good, but at the same time, that awareness of all these different genres is probably not as good as singing with your friends in a choir or playing instruments with your buddies in a garage. That is where the true magic of music in a positive sense can occur.
I love that. And I want to keep going on this tip of the positive musical experiences that we can have, these organic, natural, and divine musical experiences, where the music worships the Most High instead of the deceiver. And being in a chorus, when I was in grad school, I joined a choir. It was the first chorus I'd ever done. I was musical my whole life, but I was always in jazz bands or punk bands or concert bands. It wasn't until I was in grad school that I joined a chorus, and my musicality skyrocketed. The way I heard music and held down the bass lines in this choir, and I could hear people resonating with me, and we're micro tuning. This is the other thing about voice: is there's no frets or buttons in your voice. You can whoop, you can sweep and subtly change the pitches so that you can actually harmonize better. Human voices, this is a fact, can harmonize better than a piano can with itself, because a piano is very locked into these certain frequencies. You can't bend the note of a piano. On the electric keyboard, you get a pitch wheel, which we can bend like that, but the human voice is the most organic instrument. And when you come together as people, you're entraining your energies together and you're harmonizing. And also, I think when you glorify God in the music, it takes it to another level. So the church choirs and things like that. Not to mention you're in this huge opulent space that reverberates and is probably built with the acoustics in mind to amplify the goodness. So I encourage everyone to try to find the music that is pure. It's not all music is terrible and mind control, right? Even I think even in country, there's the pop watered down version, and then there's like the real version, someone just playing guitar and singing the blues. And you know, it wasn't until I heard Johnny Cash where I was like, oh, I kind of like country music. I didn't know I really liked any part of it, because most of it was just
Commercialized.
so commercialized and so like you said, wrapped up in alcoholism and heartbreak. So, I just encourage everyone to listen to the pure music that you think comes from a pure place, isn't all about drugs, and uplifts you instead of like drags you down to the street into these violent patterns and images. So, what do you listen to? Is there music that you find is pure that you can handle, or is it just the birds? Is it just God's creation?
No, I listen to like a lot of 2000s music, like early 2000s. I am a sucker for human vocals. I love vocals. I love people who can sing. So you will hear me listening to some R&B specifically. I like Miguel. I like R. Kelly. I like Mariah Carey. I like, and I will throw in a nostalgic hip hop song. I love female vocals. I think that there's something special about a woman singing, that when she does sing, it's like this Aphrodite Dionysus effect. So I do listen to that a lot. I listen to just anything I can just move and dance to is cool with me. But my appetite for the disgusting stuff has really minimized. Like when I snapped out of hip-hop hypnosis, like I couldn't really listen to it the same way again. I'll get disgusted by it. Like
Mm-hmm.
to the point where I'll get like a stomach reaction, like this is gross. So and one of the cool things I like to do is I don't listen to that music that much. I think the invention of the iPod, not even the iPhone, but the invention of the iPod, where people had libraries in their hands, it sort of created these relentless appetites for music at all times. So when I don't listen to as much music, it sounds so good to me. Like when I'm in the bank, when I'm in the grocery store, it's just, I'll hear some Alanis Morissette, like, wow, that's a jam. You know what I mean? Some Jewel, something like that, So um yeah, I kind of go with the motion of the ocean.
I like it. And I like that you mentioned too the female voice. I think there's something primal about that, as our mother's voice is usually one of the first things we hear and the most common thing that we hear as we're developing our brains. And our ears are even tuned to this. Our most sensitive frequencies that we can hear is around 5,000 hertz to like 7,000 hertz. That's where the female voice has like a peak in the frequency response graph. We are most sensitive to the voice of a female specifically, not people, but females, because their voices are like an octave higher than men's, interestingly. So that's totally true. Find yourself some pure female vocalists.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to mention, you mentioned the choir. I had such a good experience. I was going to an Orthodox church for a while, and the one thing that I remembered was the choir was so good, combined with some organs and things of that nature. What would happen to me is the choir would stay in my head. So for the remainder of that week, I would hear these songs they were singing in my head, and it would positively charge me throughout the week. So like the
Mm-hmm.
potential for music as positive it's I think it's something that's being hidden from us, and that we need to rediscover, and we need to deploy, because the power is so unlimited and high.
Totally. And you mentioned the church. I think that's really important. The intersection of music and the church, and also glorifying the Most High and positive things in the world. Um, as a kid, I believe I was programmed to be skeptical of and despise the church. And all of religion and any mention of Jesus and God, I was kind of turned off by it, because I saw a lot of corruption. I saw what the Catholic, institution was doing and the crimes they were covering up, and I couldn't reconcile how God would allow that, or how they could represent Jesus at all. And what I learned is they don't. They don't represent Jesus. Only Jesus does, and the Bible does. And once I started reading that, it became clear to me that there's something beautiful about that collection of work, about that history, about that energy, and about congregating with people who want to feel the Spirit and be grateful for the Spirit. So I'm snapping out of anti-God hypnosis, I think, is
That's
another
cool.
way.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah, and leaving like the hip hop music, I think of the word streets. Like it's the one, if I hear someone say hip hop, I think of like streets. It's very connected. Street is the low level of the physical plane, right? The physical plane. So hip hop, especially with the drums, locks you into the lower dimensional physical plane. You go to church and you hear the choir or participate in the choir, you're now ascending to a higher plane and you're summoning those energies. And I think it's just a much purer, beautiful way to go with music. Interestingly, I went to my first church service outside of a funeral, wedding, Christmas, or Easter yesterday
Wow.
because I found this is an interesting story. 2 days ago, I was at my brother's place in downtown Miami, and I decide I need some greens. So I go to Whole Foods, and there's a road I usually take to go to Whole Foods, but I decided, I'm going to go the other way. So I'm skateboarding down Biscayne Boulevard. I usually don't take Biscayne because it has these bricks that are hard to skate on, but I did it anyway. Something called me that direction. I ended up stumbling across a worship band, and they're glorifying God with their music, and people were praying for each other, and it was like a very powerful, very beautiful thing. Somebody invited me to the church. He said, "Hey, are you part of a church? Come to mine tomorrow." Gave me a card. Yesterday, I ended up going, met a beautiful family of this congregation, had a beautiful time. The music was amazing, man. And I was so turned off by church music in the past that I don't know. I think I can see now for what it is, that it's beautiful, the gospel music and glorifying the Creator, and ascending instead of staying locked to the streets and the low dimension. And now I want to say one more thing about that. Rudolf Steiner talked about this. He talked about the vowels and ahs and sounds that sustain, like vowels and the voice, that comes from the heavens. And he says that the drums and percussive things, because of their transient nature, if you hit a drum or any percussion, it's a very, very short, transient, it's over in a split second. But vowels and things that sustain, it calls upon like the energy of the infinite. And so that's why I think voice is closer to God than percussion.
Wow.
I'm not saying drums are satanic, but I'm saying drums are earthly. It's a lower dimensional thing. It's a physical plane. It's boom, 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 boom. And all those notes are very transient. But instruments that use wind, for example, and some string instruments have a more sustaining sound. And that to me is connected to the heavens. So I see that too. Like voice can be pure. I also think that's why hip hop is so based in the rhythm and the drums and these like super low 808 basses, because it further attaches us to the lower dimensional materialistic nature of earth and keeping us away from the energy of the heavens. Does that resonate with you at all?
Totally, man. I love it. I absolutely love it. Especially if you interpret English, some say, as an angelic language. So if we're saying vowels in this angelic tongue, yeah, it's definitely going to the heavens. And as far as percussion instruments go, I would totally agree. Not evil. Awesome. Can, sort of dance to them once you find that beat, right? But they tap into our instincts as men. They do. There is the eternal war drums. If you hear drums on repeat, that's going to tap into your instincts. And a lot of it is to tribalistically sort of ignite your appetite for regional warfare. So I think that when you think about drill music and the percussion instruments and the violent overtones, it's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for more negativity, just a cycle of it. So wow, yeah, that was an awesome way of looking at it, man. That's really cool. And just like going to a church, going to a location, that's something, and singing with people and just worshiping God. that is a physiologically healthy activity for human beings.
100%. So some people listening might not know what drill music is. It sort of came out in the last 10 years, right? Is that sort of like the newest iteration of gangster hip hop music?
I think it's been around since 2012. I know like the history of it, but it's specific to murder music, basically. So where these guys will reference specific murders that happen of other gang members, they will make references in their songs. And guess what? The other gang might retaliate in their songs. So it's actually this musical warfare back and forth, but they're talking about real things that really happened. And it gets pretty dark because they start taunting each other and this dead member, that dead member, and it gets really just gutter, just super gutter.
Yeah, man. And people might look at this music as liberating because, oh, I can rap about whatever I want and I can reflect my human experience. And, I can even tour the world and become famous on this. And to many people, it has this promise of freedom. But in your book, you basically ask, like, what if all these vices that they embrace, the drugs, the gunplay, the whores, what if they were not really the juicy fruits of freedom, but the gaudy chains of slavery? So it's another way that the industry is giving us this thing which we think frees us, but it's really locking our consciousness down. We're not ascending. We're just stuck in this low vibration.
Yeah. One book that I also think nails this, and it sort of made me fall in love with fiction in a way, is actually Dune by Frank Herbert, right? Because in Dune, it's this galactic warfare, right? But there's a lot of truth in it. Okay. So you can put so much truth in fiction. So in Dune, there's this thing called spice. Okay. And it's this natural resource that they're all battling over, but it's really a metaphor for vice. So within the hip hop industry, right, these vices are promoted. But once you get controlled by your vice, you're essentially a slave, right? So it's kind of like you think it's freedom, but it's actually slavery music. Some of these artists that you might look up to that they're so cool, so amazing, are slaves. And once you have that
Mm-hmm.
mindset breakthrough, there's no going back.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about something that's popping up in our culture today, which is Kanye West, and all the crazy stuff he's doing, but he's doing it because to me, it seems like it's a reaction to the parasitic music industry exploiting black culture. And he says, how come you can make all this money off that, but you're
Uh-huh.
not going to let me crack jokes and sort of exploit, your suffering, the culture, another culture's suffering. So there's
Uh-huh.
this weird double standard where, you know, help me put this into words. Like,
So I'd say this. I think Kanye is willing to crash. I think he's absolutely willing to crash out. I think he's willing to go all in as an artist. I think he's a little bit disgusting, quite frankly, because some of the things he's uh, disclosed about his past were enough for me to say, all right, I'm out. I'm out. He has this one song where he talks about he had an interaction. I can't even talk about it with his cousin, his male cousin. And he talks about that. And ever since then, I've kind of been like, all right, dude, I'm out. I'll be mildly entertained by these jingles, but I'm kind of out. But as far as somebody who's willing to just go all in, is almost ready to fully crash out, like doesn't care if he lives or dies, that's him. And he's letting it all out there, and he's kind of laying out the entire game for people in regards to the music industry and the methods of control, because you can make a song about killing each other. You can totally do that. It'll be promoted. You can make a song about drug use. That's promoted. But any other taboo topic, right? And him being the biggest voice, I go to the gym. It's a Kanye West song. To this day, I go to the smoothie bar. It's a Kanye West song. Like real experiences. Like, wow, this guy's got hits on hits on hits on hits, right?
mm-hmm.
It's for him to have the biggest voice and for him to sort of lay out the game for people, and at the same time creating these jingles about these taboo subjects. It's a situation where this, to me, Kanye represents the last breaths of hip hop hypnosis, because he's the only one garnering attention. The other things people are doing, you might make some great music. Drake might make some great music. They might make some good, catchy choruses, some interesting like love ballads. You might do that, but it's simply not as interesting as this guy spazzing out and laying out the whole game. You know what I mean? It's like you and I kind of already understand this game that's being played. Um, so it's like, okay, cool. But to see the masses potentially either understand this or potentially just dismiss it as crazy, that's what's interesting right now with Kanye. So
Yeah. I can't help think about this too. The golden age of hip hop was like 1993. And here we are 30 years later. And I think things happen in 30-year cycles, especially in culture. We see things come back 30 years later as a fad or it is usually a fad because it dies again. And that's interesting. You said this is the last breaths of hip hop hypnosis because it's like the mid 90s are being revived and that energy is coming back. I think 30 years after the early 2000s, which will put us 2030, 2031, that to me might be I think we might see like a resurgence of a lot of that energy, but we also just might see it fade and dissipate and lead to something new. But I do think that the people who are invested in social control, they're always going to have another tactic lined up, So if people lose their interest in hip hop, it's going to be through something else, and they're going to do it before it fully fades away. You mentioned that Kanye is not afraid of crashing out, and you've written about the art of crashing out. So
for sure.
what is crash out? What does that mean to you?
So if you were to visualize a crash test dummy in a vehicle that's about to crash, a crash a crasher in real life is somebody who's willing to go all in and is willing to metaphorically crash in order to attain something higher or in order to end a current cycle and begin something entirely new. So somebody who's willing to crash out is somebody who could potentially, like Kanye, for example, cause a scene, have a fight with a significant other, have a fight with a family member. You can verbally crash out. You can physically crash out. You can crash out on your own life. And it's not always a good thing. It's a lot of times it's very negative, but it's sort of this entry pathway where if you've ever quit a job, that's an example of a miniature crash out. Or if you've ever ended a relationship, that would be sort of a crash out, or just laid into somebody, tore into somebody, fought somebody. These are all examples of different forms of crashing out. So it's been an interesting term that I definitely identified with for a time period in, sort of in the crash up cycle now. So yeah.
Yeah, to me that means like just being all in
Yes.
and being ready for any consequences that come. Because like you have your eye on a goal. Like let's say you're surfing or something, your goal is to ride the wave, but you're not afraid of falling off the surfboard and getting totally consumed by a wave because that's going to be fuel for the next time.
Yes. And it's also, you learn.
You learn and you have to go through these crashes. Exactly.
100%.
So go all in and don't be afraid of some battle scars. That's all part of the game.
It's funny that you liked the Chet character because I work with a coach on some of my fiction writing, and I told him, I was like, Chet's going to be a lot of people's favorite character because Chet was willing to crash out. Chet was really going all in. So
yeah. You asked me like who was your favorite character, and Chet came to mind just because he's the rapper, the up and coming rapper who. Man, I really want to illustrate this scene for people, but I don't know. I don't want to give away your book. It's like the funniest.
I would say go for it. Go. Oh, okay. Oh no, don't give that one away. Yeah, they can buy it.
Yeah. I'm going to keep that in the tank. I'm going to encourage people to go pick up the Sharter and read it. But he is not afraid to crash out, and he even seizes opportunity extremely well. Like this really negative thing happened to him. Most people would have just completely lost their hope in life and became super depressed and just had no reason to live because they were so humiliated. But what he did is he flipped that and he ran with it, and it ended up working in his favor. So I admire anyone who can kind of go all in and seize opportunity, even though he did try to kill his friend and, was doing all this degenerate type of stuff. Like I still admired his go get it attitude and like his tenacity.
Totally. He's very entrepreneurial.
Oh yeah, because he was. I mean, he was the biggest drug user of their little friends group, but he also made the most money.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Big
like
time.
he was more successful in some way. I know we don't measure success on income primarily, but for a teenage kid, is like he was kicking ass in his friends group. Do you have a favorite character from the book?
Good question. Um, Maybe Mr. Mishima. He's sort of this
Mm-hmm.
mentor figure that enters Kobe's life. Kobe's a character who wants to be a hip hop blogger, wants to be a hip hop journalist. So Mr. Mishima, in a lot of ways, I also like. There are these two cops. No, favorite character is Robert Denning. Robert Denning is my
Mm.
favorite character. Robert Denning is a cop. He has a partner named Jacob Stantler. So they're traversing these worlds between these groups of teens who are, hip hop fans, these rappers who are trying to kill each other, these executives who are plotting against each other. So the cops, there's two cops, Robert Denning and Jacob Sandler. Robert Denning is like an alcoholic boomer, but he has a heart of gold. And then there's Jacob Stantler, who's a straight edge. He's like straight out of the academy, does everything by the book. He's very Jacob Stantler is very Virgo, right? Um,
Mm.
very very Virgo. And then yeah, Robert Denning, I'd say, is my favorite character.
Cool. And he was based on Officer Bob, right? Who saved Lil Wayne's life in New Orleans back when Lil Wayne, did he shoot himself as a kid? Was that the story?
That's the story, you know. And I'm dubious of this story. I'm not. The story is that Little Wayne was at his house by himself and he accidentally shot himself in the chest. And then later they tried to like sort of say, oh, he attempted to commit suicide. They try to make it spicier. I don't think he tried to commit suicide. I think he probably did it on accident. I don't think 11-year-old kids commit suicide like that. But I could be wrong. I don't really know. But that's the general gist. And then this officer Bob, who was off duty at the time, goes in and saves his life. So Little Wayne owes his life to like this guy.
He threw him in his own car, took him to the hospital. And I mean, that's a real story. You can look up
Yes.
Lil
Yeah.
Wayne and Officer Bob. But yeah, man, great characters in the book. Everybody go pick it up. And the audiobook, if people don't like reading, they can listen to you narrate the Sharter, right?
Yes. The audiobook should be out um, Thursday, which is what, May 15th or May 16th, hopefully, because they take a 10-day, what's it called? 10 business days. So I submitted it. It's been the longest 10 business days of my life because I can't wait for people to hear this because I perform all these different characters. And it took me like 10 drafts to fully complete it. So if it's not available on Amazon this weekend, I'm going to upload it to Gumroad or something because I just can't wait.
I think by the time this episode comes out, it will be out. So everybody
That'd be
go if
incredible.
you want to consume the Sharter through your ears instead of your eyes, you can always download the audiobook. What was it like making the audiobook? Because you said you went through 10 drafts. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
lot. And audiobooks, I know from experience, I'm narrating one right now. I'm reading a book from 1867, and it's on my YouTube channel, The School of Unlearning. But it takes a long time. I mean, you got to record it right. You got to re-record certain lines that you messed up. And then the editing process is insane. So can you tell me a little bit about what it took to create this audiobook?
Wow. So it's an interesting process because I've realized that it's like part of my editing process. To hear your own words and to perform them will inspire you to improve them. So it's definitely something I'm going to be doing more in the future, just as part of my own personal editing process of the physical book. But as far as it was entirely new territory for me for the most part. Like I was familiar with GarageBand and things like that just through podcasts in audio software, stuff like that. But I used that. I recorded it on my mic. But what would happen is I would re-listen to it, be like, okay, I can perform that better. I can perform in that character's voice better. Okay, I need to exaggerate that character's voice better. Okay, I can do that better. I can do that better. Let me do it again. Okay, again, again, again. So all the lines I performed like 10 times each, like every line in the book. It's a 10 and a half hour audiobook. This book is like 315 pages, right? So going through all that with all those different characters, um, it took a lot. It took a lot of, okay, I can do that one better, because the bottom line for me with the audiobook is not just simply read it, it's to perform it. It's to voice act instead of just simply read. And with all these different characters and I'm doing all these different accents, that was the challenge. And to get it up to standard, that I wanted it to be. It took a long time.
Yeah, man. But you have that mind and that capacity. I think as a Virgo, you guys are very detail oriented and want to get things right, and you process information well. So, the editing process I know is a pain in the ass, but congratulations on finishing it, man.
Appreciate that though. Virgos actually love editing. That's the sick part. Like the going through the details and like, we enjoy it, which is kind of weird.
Right on. And I've always had a lot of male Virgo friends. Looking back, I kind of learned this, like seeing people's birthdays, like, oh, all you guys are Virgos. I think I like the brain of a male Virgo. Well, women too, but I'm just noticing the pattern more that I have a lot of male Virgo friends, and because they think a lot and they're detail oriented and their propensity for sort of the details, I appreciate that. So, what are you working on next? You have another book in the pipeline, right?
Yeah, I'm working on a book about a surf assassin. So it's a completely unrelated, but it's still fiction. It's still sort of in the same style. But there's a surfer in the late 90s is when the book takes place. He ends up killing a guy at work, and a mysterious benefactor witnesses the murder and decides that it's pretty cool. And he decides to bring this he decides to bring this surfer into his secret society and as an assassin. So it gets pretty sick. It's a fun book, man. It's really, really fun book. So I'm 100,000 words deep and I'm just going through it. I'm in my grammar book almost every night, trying to improve my own technical skills. I work with a coach and I'm just kind of all in on that in addition to my other projects, but I want to start recording that audiobook in August. So I'm really looking for people's like feedback on the audiobook on this one, just because I want to incorporate that feedback into the next audiobook and improve it.
Right on. Anyone who listens to the Sharter, you can give Al some feedback, and he'll use that to hone and refine the next one. I find it really interesting, your sort of career path, because you're all in on these books now, but you used to be maybe you still are, used to be involved in podcasting and interviews. Didn't
Yeah.
you interview like the Tate brothers back in the day before they even blew up, and like Vivek and things like that? What got you into podcasting, and what were some of the big episodes that you put out there?
So I had an interesting trajectory after I got out of college. After I got out of college, I asked myself, if you could do anything, what would you do? I said, okay, I'll start a libertarian hip hop sports blog. And so I did that in 2015, and that led to some other opportunities. It wasn't Vivek; it was a guy named Dr. Shiva. So,
Oh, that's right. My bad.
yep. After I did that website, I made it, and I was also working various different jobs in construction, landscaping, this, that, and the other, while I was working on my own creative projects. 2017, I ended up working on a campaign, the real Indian versus the fake Indian campaign. It was Dr. Shiva versus Elizabeth Warren here in Massachusetts. So I worked on that for a while. 2018, I was like, I got out of that. I'm working in excavating. In 2018, I met a guy. He had a studio, and I thought to myself, hey, I should start a podcast. I can get guests. I know I can get guests. And let's just do it, man. He wasn't doing anything with his studio. So I was like, dude, let's do this. And so we did that, started out getting some pretty good guests, but I know who's going to be big in advance. I've always known this, even with rap artists. Like I'll be like, okay, that guy's going to be big. That's a good artist. Like he's going to blow up or whatever. So 2018, it was, Tate was just in the neighborhood. Andrew Tate specifically was in the neighborhood of the internet I was in. And I just hit him up. I hit up Tristan because Andrew didn't have a Twitter account at the time. I was like, hey, Tristan, do you want to come do an interview? Because the show I did prior, it was this huge debate between Nick Fuentes and Styx Hexenhammer 666. It's still up on YouTube. It's got like almost 200,000 views. So after I hosted that big debate, I hit up Tristan Tate. I was like, you want to do a show? And then it wasn't him I was talking to. It was Andrew Tate I was talking to the entire time. So he's like, boom, he kind of like surprised me. So I interview him. But people didn't care about that stuff till like 4 or 5 years later. And I would tell people like, oh, I interviewed such and such back then. I talked to all these different people way back when. And they're like, no way. And I'll be like, yeah, here's the link. And that was just kind of it. So the podcast thing was cool for a bit, but I'm really just trying to establish direct connection to audience, and just um, do more videos and just do more books and just go direct.
Where can people find you?
I would say you can find me on Instagram at Alfonso, ALFONSOFRFR. That's a good one. But I'm going to say go to hiphophypnosis.com. That'll bring you to the book. You can go to the sharterbook.com, or you could go to alfonsofr.com, ALFONSOFR.com. That'll bring you to all my links.
Right on. hiphophypnosis.com. Get yourself the Sharter. Snap out of hip hop hypnosis now, because it is urgent that we embrace better music that has better energy to it, right? I think if you're listening to this episode, good job for just being aware and trying to expand your view of how music can be subversive. So, Al, is there anything else that you want to mention about your book or about this phenomenon
Yeah,
before we wrap it up?
I'd say this, even if you were never a hip hop fan, if you were never into that world, it doesn't matter. You can still laugh your ass off reading this book or listening to this audiobook. So if you're in the market to laugh, because I think that humor is healthy, and I think it's very healthy for human beings just to have a laugh, I would recommend this book.
Me too, ladies and gentlemen. The Sharter, A Comedic Journey Out of Hip-Hop Hypnosis by Aldog, Alfonso FR. Thanks for being on the show, brother, and we really appreciated your time.
It was a lot of fun, man. Take care.
All right. We'll see y'all next time on Radical Health. Peace.